The air in Isiocha hung thick and heavy, not just with the usual humidity of the approaching rainy season, promising relief that seemed to never quite arrive, but with a different, more oppressive weight. It was the kind of silence that precedes a scream, a suffocating stillness that hinted at a lurking shadow, unseen but keenly felt. For weeks, the whispers had been growing, snaking like invisible vines through the bustling market stalls, rustling in the thatch roofs of every hut, and clinging to the dry leaves of the mango trees. All of them, like malevolent spirits, centered on Yellonna. Her name, once spoken with indifference, now carried a distinct, chilling note of dread. Before the darkness truly began to unfurl, Yellonna was just a girl. A girl from a humble mud-brick home, the only child of a mother whose hands were calloused from a lifetime of toil. Her skin was a rich, dark earth, her features pleasant enough, but she lacked the captivating allure that turned heads in the village. Her frame was sturdy, not the willowy grace that adorned the daughters of King Oba. Then came the summons. A royal decree, delivered by a messenger with a voice like thunder. Yellonna was to serve in the king's palace. Her mother, whose joy was as boundless as her relief, saw it as a blessing. A future secured, a life beyond the constant struggle for yams and cassava. Yellonna, too, felt a tremor of excitement, a yearning for the gilded life she'd only ever seen from afar. The king's palace was a symphony of opulence. Rich tapestries adorned the walls, the scent of exotic spices hung in the air, and laughter, light and melodic, echoed through the grand halls. At the very heart of this boundless splendor, radiating their own unique brilliance that could outshine even the most precious jewels, were the two princesses, Amara and Zola. They were, in a word, breathtaking, each possessing a beauty that transcended mere physical perfection. Amara, the elder, was a vision of serene strength. Her eyes, like polished obsidian, deep and shimmering, held an ancient wisdom that belied her youthful grace. When she gazed upon someone, it felt as though she saw into their very soul. Her smile, when it graced her lips, was not just a curve of her mouth, it was a phenomenon, radiating a warmth so profound it could melt the fiercest, dust-laden Harmattan winds that swept across the land, leaving in its wake a feeling of pure, unadulterated comfort. Zola, her younger sister, was a stark yet harmonious contrast. She was a vision of lithe, effortless grace, every movement a dancer's precise artistry, a poetry in motion. Whether she was walking through the gardens, greeting a visitor, or simply turning her head, there was an elegant fluidity that captivated all who beheld her. Her voice, a gentle, melodious song, could soothe the most troubled spirit, weaving a spell of calm and serenity with every word. Together, they were the twin jewels of the palace, admired by all, adored by their people. From the very moment Yellonna stepped into their privileged world, a world so starkly different from her own humble beginnings in a small, mud-brick hut on the outskirts of the kingdom, the princesses embraced her with an openness that defied the rigid social strata of the court. The usual, invisible barriers between royalty and commoners simply dissolved in their presence. They saw past her simple attire and nervous demeanor, recognizing a kindred spirit, a vibrant spark that resonated with their own. They treated her not as a servant, a mere attendant to their whims, but as a cherished sister, a confidant, and a true friend. But as the days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, a venomous seed began to sprout in Yellonna's heart. It wasn't the kind of jealousy that gnaws quietly, this was a hungry, demanding beast. She saw how the men of Isioche, strong warriors and respected elders alike, fell at Amara and Zola's feet. Not just the local men, but suitors from distant villages, with their rich gifts and even richer promises. Their beauty, their slim waists, their impossibly curvy hips, it was a constant, excruciating torment to Yellonna, whose own body felt like a heavy, shapeless burden next to their ethereal grace. She yearned for their effortless charm, their magnetic allure, the way they commanded attention with a mere glance. The gifts, once tokens of affection, now felt like mocking reminders of all she lacked. The sisterly love, once a comfort, now tasted bitter, a constant comparison she always lost. The beast of envy grew, its claws tearing at her insides, whispering insidious thoughts into her mind. Why them? Why not me? King Oba, a man of wisdom and keen observation, saw the shift in Yellonna. He saw the subtle hardening around her eyes, the way her laughter grew forced, the way her gaze lingered a little too long on his daughters. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. He knew the insidious nature of envy, how it could fester and destroy. With a heavy heart, he made his decision. One morning, as the sun climbed above the palm trees, Yellonna was informed of her dismissal. Not with anger, but with a quiet solemnity. The king, in his wisdom, simply stated that her services were no longer required. Yellonna's mother, when she heard the news, erupted. Her only source of livelihood, snatched away. Her dreams of a comfortable old age, shattered like clay pots dropped from a height. Her anger, sharp and stinging, became Yellonna's own, fueling the fire that already raged within her. It wasn't just about the money now, it was about injustice, about being cast aside, about the glaring unfairness of it all. Driven by a desperate, gnawing need, Yellonna ventured beyond the familiar paths of Isiochu. She sought out the whispered legends, the stories of ancient powers hidden in the deep forests. Her journey led her to a neighboring village, a place shrouded in ancient lore, where the very air thrummed with a different kind of magic. There, nestled deep within a sacred grove, stood the Great Iroko. Its branches, gnarled and ancient, reached for the heavens, its roots, thick as python coils, burrowed deep into the earth. It was said that the Iroko granted wishes, but at a price known only to itself. Yellonna, her heart a drumbeat of desperate desire, approached the colossal tree. The village elder, his eyes clouded with age and wisdom, listened to her plea. He nodded slowly, his gaze unreadable. "The Iroko grants wishes, child," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "But it demands a payment. To reshape your form, to claim what is not yours, you must bring offerings. Items that carry the essence of those you wish to emulate. Personal items. Belongings of the king's daughters." A thrill, cold and sharp, shot through Yellonna. It was a daunting task, but her hunger for change was far greater than any fear. She would do it. She would return to the palace, a ghost in the shadows, and take what was needed. The price, the elder had not explained, and Yellonna, in her desperate yearning, didn't care to ask. Her goal was clear, to snatch the princess's lifestyle, to enhance her own body and beauty, to finally be the one who commanded attention, the one who captivated every eye. She did it. Slipping back into the palace under the cloak of night, a thief of desires, she managed to procure what was needed. A delicate silver earring, dropped by Amara near the royal fountain. A silken scarf, left by Zola on a courtyard bench, still carrying the faint scent of jasmine. Yellonna clutched them, her heart pounding with a mix of triumph and trepidation. Returning to the Great Iroko, she laid the items at its massive base. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen energy. The leaves of the Iroko seemed to stir, even without a breeze. A deep hum resonated from within the ancient trunk, a sound that vibrated not just in her ears, but in her very bones. Yellonna closed her eyes, picturing her transformed self, slim, curvaceous, radiant, surrounded by a throng of eager suitors. The hum intensified, then slowly began to fade. When Yellonna opened her eyes, the Iroko stood silent, unchanging. Had it worked? Had her wish been granted? A shiver, not of cold but of something ancient and unsettling, snaked up her spine. The elder was nowhere to be seen. The forest around her seemed darker, more watchful. As Yellonna walked away from the Iroko, a strange sensation began to bloom within her. A subtle shift, like the earth itself beginning to move beneath her feet. She felt lighter, yet also different. The air around her suddenly felt charged, almost electric. She reached a hand to her waist, then to her hips, a tremor of anticipation running through her. Had her wish been granted? Was this the beginning of her new life? But the Great Iroko never grants wishes for free. And the silence it kept about the price was far more terrifying than any explanation. The true horror was yet to begin. For every wish, there is a balance. And the Iroko always collects its due. Yellonna's anger simmered, a bitter brew in her gut, as she stumbled away from the ancient Iroko tree. No immediate transformation. The same sturdy frame, the same features she had grown to despise. The elder, his face a mask of serene indifference, had merely offered a cryptic instruction as she left. They said to her in a fading tone, "Always brush your hair with the comb, child, and keep the scarf under your pillow." Useless advice, she'd thought, feeling the sting of betrayal. She had offered the princess's treasured possessions, endured the terrifying hum of the tree, and for what? Nothing. She returned to her mother's humble home, the weight of her disappointment pressing down on her. Her mother, still seething from the palace dismissal, barely noticed Yellonna's silent frustration. The night passed in a restless haze, Yellonna tossing and turning on her straw mat, the silver comb and silken scarf clutched tight. Then came the first cock's crow. Not the usual cheerful greeting of the dawn, but a piercing, triumphant shriek that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the night. Yellonna bolted upright, a strange lightness filling her. She reached for her waist, her fingers trembling. Where was the familiar thick flesh? Her hands glided over a new curve, a breathtaking, delicate dip. She swung her legs over the mat, a new grace in her movements. Staggering to the small, polished metal mirror, a gasp caught in her throat. Before her stood a stranger. Her skin, once a rich, deep earth, now shimmered with an almost ethereal glow. Her eyes, once merely dark, now held a captivating depth, like pools reflecting the midnight sky. Her lips, fuller and more inviting, curved into a perfect bow. And her body, my God! Oh, her body! A slim waist, a breathtaking hourglass figure, hips that flared with a sensual curve she'd only dreamed of. She was beautiful, truly, utterly beautiful. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over her, making her heart pound with delirious triumph. She twirled, she danced, she laughed a sound so rich and melodious it barely seemed to belong to her. This was it. This was everything she had wished for, and more. But as the initial euphoria began to wane, a subtle unease began to creep in. A faint tremor in her hands. A whisper of coldness that seemed to emanate from within. She dismissed it, attributing it to the shock of her transformation. The changes continued, both miraculous and terrifying. With each passing day, Yellonna's beauty intensified, drawing gasps of admiration from everyone she encountered. Men from Isioche and beyond, those who had once fawned over Amara and Zola, now flocked to her. They brought gifts, composed songs in her honor, and vied for her attention. Her mother, initially overjoyed by her daughter's sudden allure, basked in the reflected glory. Their humble home was no longer a place of want, but a hub of attention and lavish offerings. The Great Iroko had granted Yellonna her deepest desire, transforming her from a sturdy, unremarkable girl into a vision of breathtaking beauty. But as the initial euphoria faded, a chilling truth began to unfurl, revealing the insidious nature of the ancient tree's magic. The beautiful shell she now inhabited was becoming a cage, and the whispers, once faint, were growing louder, promising a darkness she could not yet comprehend. Among the many suitors who now flocked to Yellonna's transformed presence was Jide, a prosperous merchant from the bustling city of Abeokuta. His eyes, sharp and discerning, had been captivated by her radiant beauty, and he offered her a week-long journey to his city, promising sights and luxuries beyond her wildest dreams. Yellonna, intoxicated by her newfound allure and the endless adoration, readily agreed. In her haste and excitement, she forgot the elder's cryptic instruction, leaving behind the silver comb and silken scarf in her mother's humble home. "They are just trinkets now," she thought, "my beauty is my own." The first few days in Abeokuta were a dizzying whirl of opulence. Jide lavished her with rich foods, shimmering fabrics, and sparkling jewelry. Yellonna reveled in the city's attention, her every step drawing admiring glances. She felt truly alive, truly desired. But as the week progressed, a subtle unease began to gnaw at her. The whispers in her mind, once about Amara and Zola, now shifted, becoming a chorus of anxiety about her own appearance. She found herself constantly checking her reflection, a nascent fear prickling at her skin. She had purchased new combs and scarves in the city, hoping to replicate the ritual, but they felt inert, powerless in her hands. The air around her, which had shimmered with an ethereal glow in Isioche, now felt heavy, almost suffocating. The strange coldness within her deepened, a persistent chill that no amount of Abeokuta's warmth could dispel. Then, on the fifth morning, she awoke with a jolt. The distinct, unsettling feeling of her body shifting. She rushed to the polished brass mirror in Jide's lavish chambers. What she saw made a strangled cry escape her lips. Her once slim waist had begun to thicken, her graceful curves softening, blurring. Her skin, which had glowed with an otherworldly luminescence, now seemed dull, almost sallow. Panic clawed at her throat. She brushed her hair furiously with the new comb, clutching the new scarf, but nothing happened. The transformation continued, relentless and horrifying. By the seventh day, the nightmare was complete. Yellonna was no longer the captivating beauty who had arrived in Abeokuta. She was shapeless, her body bloated and undefined. Her once radiant skin was now blemished, and a horrifying stench began to emanate from her, a foul, sickly sweet odor that clung to her like a shroud. It was the scent of decay, of something unnatural. Jide, who had adored her just days before, now looked at her with utter disgust. He could barely tolerate being in the same room. His grand promises vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "Get out," he snarled, thrusting her back into a carriage, sending her back to Isioche as quickly as she had arrived. The journey back was a torment. The putrid smell that clung to Yellonna's body repelled everyone. Drivers refused to take her, passengers recoiled in horror. She walked for miles, the sun beating down on her newly grotesque form, the stench intensifying with her exertion. When she finally stumbled into Isioche, the reactions were immediate and devastating. Children screamed and ran. Villagers recoiled, shielding their noses, their faces contorted in revulsion. Their whispers were no longer of admiration, but of horror and fear. "A curse," they muttered. "A demon." Her mother, who had eagerly awaited her daughter's triumphant return, opened the door, her face alight with expectation. But the moment she saw Yellonna, truly saw her eyes widened in terror. A choked sob escaped her, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The look on her mother's face, a mixture of shock, revulsion, and profound sadness, was a blade to Yellonna's already shattered heart. Desperate, humiliated, and utterly broken, Yellonna knew there was only one place to go. She dragged her unwieldy, stinking body back to the ancient Iroko tree. She prostrated herself before its massive trunk, tears streaming down her swollen face, mingling with the sweat and the putrid odor. She begged, she pleaded, she wailed, telling the silent, imposing tree of her suffering, her stench, her unbearable ugliness. The air around the Iroko grew heavy once more, but this time there was no hum of power, only a deep, profound silence. After what felt like an eternity, the foul stench that clung to Yellonna's body began to recede, slowly, imperceptibly at first, then more rapidly. It was gone. The overwhelming, humiliating smell vanished as if it had never been. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. But when she looked down at her body, a fresh wave of despair crashed over her. The shapeless, grotesque form remained. The Iroko had taken away the smell, the most immediate and public humiliation, but it had left her to suffer her ugliness. It had returned her to a state far worse than before her wish. It was a cruel mercy, a bitter punishment. The Great Iroko had collected its ultimate payment, leaving her trapped in a body she abhorred, forever marked by her envy and her desperate pursuit of borrowed beauty. And as Yellonna stood before the silent, unyielding tree, a new, chilling realization dawned upon her: the whispers had stopped. But the silence that replaced them was far more terrifying. What else had the Iroko taken from her? And what new horror awaited her in this shapeless, unloved form?